Hi everybody, this is Craig Shacklett from URComped, and I'm here with another of our weekly interviews with Dr. David Schwartz, Director of the Center for Gaming Research at University of Nevada, Las Vegas. Dr. Dave, thank you for being here.
Thanks for having me.
Oh, it's always a pleasure. So this week, we're going to talk about entertainment in Las Vegas and the evolution of from way back when with jugglers to where we are today. So now, why don't you fill us in, Dr. Dave? What was early Las Vegas entertainment like?
In the 40s, the early casinos would have shows that would have one or two headliners, and it might be a dancer or a comedian or a singer, but they had a lot of acts, and you would have the chorus line of women who would accompany the singer, but you would also have all kinds of different stuff, animal acts, contortionists, jugglers, a lot of comedy, a lot of novelty music acts. So there's a little bit of everything. It was a lot like variety or vaudeville.
And were the acts that were being brought in, were they well-known acts that were being used to draw in a national audience, or were they just kind of talented people that happened to be in Las Vegas?
They were kind of well-known. Most of them had a couple of big national hits, but they weren't really the top-rank entertainers that would come later.
And who was the first kind of iconic entertainment that came into Las Vegas?
Well, there's been a lot, but probably the one with the longest lasting name was Frank Sinatra.
Okay, and that would be Frank Sinatra and the Rat Pack?
And the Rat Pack, yeah. First just Frank Sinatra, then he starts out at the Desert Inn, ends up at the Sands, and by the end of the 50s, he brings in the rest of the Rat Pack with him. That's Dean Martin and Sammy Davis Jr.
Now, it's amazing because the Rat Pack, like even today, it still holds up as like the epitome of cool, right? I mean, you just picture those guys like in suits and drinking a martini and just being the coolest dudes ever. Now, who had the idea for that? Was it Sinatra said, hey, I want to do this? Was it the owner of that hotel that courted Sinatra? Do you know how that kind of came about?
Well, mostly they were all just friends, and it grew out of a bunch of them would hang out with Humphrey Bogart and Lauren Bacall, and that was the Holmby Hills Rat Pack. Later, Frank was kind of doing his own thing, and they called his people the Rat Pack, and he hated that, by the way. He hated the term Rat Pack.
Huh.
When people would call them that, he I don't want to say he would go ballistic, but he did not like that. So he did not call them the Rat Pack. That was more something that the gossip columnists called it. And it wasn't, at first, it wasn't really supposed to be a compliment, just because Sinatra and the press had a pretty stormy relationship. But over the years, it's gotten that way.
Oh, that's hilarious. I had no idea that Rat Pack was originally a derogatory term that eventually he came to embrace, I guess.
Oh, yeah, he did.
Okay, so we had the Rat Pack, and what would you say was their reign in Las Vegas, and then what was the next kind of wave that came in?
Well, the Rat Pack was really big in the 60s, in the early 60s, a lot of that, and Sinatra leaves the Sands after Howard Hughes buys it in 67, but they'd already kind of gone on and done other stuff. So it's really a moment in the early 60s is where the Rat Pack is huge, but each of the people in it kept on performing in casinos, and into the 90s, they were all legit headliner draws. And you knew wherever the casino was, it could be Foxwoods, it could be in Atlantic City, it could be in Vegas. If you get Sinatra to perform, you're going to get the players. And that really was what drove a lot of the entertainment back then. It was not who is the best performer, who's selling the most records, who's going to get us the highest ticket price. It's who is going to bring in the gamblers.
Interesting. And one more question before we move on from the Rat Pack, because I know I'm fascinated by them and that whole era. When they were at their peak, during that kind of short window in the early 60s, was it like a residency in Vegas today where they're doing it 5 days a week, or what? I mean, what was kind of their schedule?
Usually and like all the other groups, they'd usually come in for 2 weeks at a time. So they'd have a 2-week residency, as we would call it today. Then they'd rotate out, next group would come in. Sometimes people would be so successful they'd be held over. But the idea was they'd do this several times a year. They'd come in for about 2 weeks at a shot several times during the year, and they would remain loyal to their hotel.
Got it. Okay, so then, all right, so Rat Pack ends kind of that ends in the mid to late 60s, and then what was the next kind of iconic milestone Vegas act that came in?
The next really big act, of course, was the King, Elvis Presley. And he started in 1969 at the International, which later became the Hilton, and is today the Westgate.
So Elvis's reign, was he already fat Elvis by the time he came in 69, or he got fat?
He was struggling with his weight, and he goes back and forth, and you might see him in, I'm not totally up on my Elvis, but you might see him in like 72 and he's a little bit out of shape, but then in 74 he's looking fantastic. So he was having the struggles with the weight at this time and was fluctuating back and forth.
And was it the same as the Rat Pack? Like Elvis would come in, do 2 weeks at a time, or was this more of a permanent fixture?
Yeah, well, he would do that set residency, but he performed there until 1976, and he died, I think December 1976 was his last show, and he died in 77. So pretty much that was a guaranteed thing. You would go to Vegas to see Elvis. Wow.
And were the deals structured like they are today? I mean, is a residency like we're going to touch on the modern day residencies, but I mean, was the deal basically you're getting X dollars per show and it's kind of hasn't changed?
I interviewed Alex Schufe, who was the president of the International and negotiated Elvis's contract with Colonel Parker. And he told me they literally wrote the contract on a napkin in one of the restaurants, literally. So it was really a handshake kind of thing back then. It was not nearly as big a production as it is, plus, according to Schufe, the Colonel was a huge gambler. So they're like, fine, we're going to give Elvis all this money. We know we're going to get a lot of it back because this guy's a big player. So there's a lot of that factored into it too. It wasn't just looking at who's going to sell the most tickets. If your manager was a player, they might want to bring you in.
Oh, that's genius.
I mean, but it's still Elvis, of course. So they'd bring him in. They would have brought him in anyway.
Got it. Okay. But there wasn't the long list of riders that, say, Mariah Carey may have with with her contract.
Maybe not Mariah, but definitely Elvis was royalty by this point, so he was treated well. He was treated very well.
Got it. Okay, so Elvis, last show 1976. What would you say was the big force in the 80s from an entertainment perspective in Las Vegas?
There's a lot of adjustment. This is where Vegas itself hit some hard times, and you have shows like Splash at the Riviera. We're trying to take that old production, your old showgirl stuff, the kind of thing that survived in Jubilee. They're trying to take that and reinvent it. So sort of the Folies Bergère idea, but doing it for the next generation, for kind of what we would call today the hip-hop generation. So that's Splash is one of the shows that does that. And you've got a lot of other stuff going on too. In the 70s, you have sports becoming a draw. First, it was tennis and auto racing, and then boxing becomes a big draw on the Strip. And that continues into the 80s.
Got it. Yeah, when I think of 80s entertainment in Las Vegas, it is the Don King and big boxing matches are what kind of comes to mind. Up until the late 80s, when the Big Magic Act kind of so Siegfried and Roy, of course, are what comes to mind with Mirage, and that ushered in a new era. So I guess, Siegfried and Roy was, can you talk about when they came in, and was Magic always a big deal and they were just next level, or how did Siegfried and Roy kind of become so iconic?
So the Magic was originally what they did while the dancing girls were changing their costumes. While that chorus line has changed their costumes, they would have magicians come out. It's going to keep the audience interested, and it doesn't have to be a huge production with a lot of people around it. Siegfried and Roy were one of these people who did this, and they were so popular that they got their own show at the Frontier. And when Steve Wynn opened the Mirage, he said, these are the people, this is the act that's going to headline this huge resort with all this investment that I put into it. And that was definitely a change.
Got it. Okay. And then actually, when you said dancers changing costumes, some popped into my mind. Hopefully you don't think I'm a pervert or anything, but when did the topless review, and where was that?
Yeah,
was
so
that from the beginning?
Stuff starts in the late 50s, early 60s, because they're building these casinos, and They just need something new that people can't get, and they brought them over from France. And this is something you wouldn't see in the United States so much, but in France, you had a lot of these topless shows. And it would be dancing, and they'd have all the sequins and the feathers and all that. Those shows started, Folies Bergère and also the Lido de Paris were the two first, and really set the tone. And they're going to copy them in a lot of the casinos. And that's going to be a pretty popular thing into even the 2000s. And Jubilee, which was the last one, closed a couple of years ago. So they don't really have them anymore. They do have the topless review shows, but it's not the same feather and sequin spectacular as it used to be. It's updated.
Got it. Okay. All right. So we had Siegfried and Roy, obviously huge national, probably international celebrities, in large part thanks to the Mirage. And then what kind of era did that usher in? What came from Siegfried and Roy?
Well, this is where you have a lot of things like Cirque, where you're going to invest a lot of money, millions of dollars, in putting together a production show, but you can have your accountants amortize it so it's not going to cost as much, and it just works out really well for the balance sheet if you do this. And also then you don't have to worry about having to spend a lot of money on today's hottest headliners because you have this huge show that people are going to see. So that's really was the driving force in the 90s and the 2000s.
That's really interesting. I never thought of that angle, that they can treat it as a capital expense and then depreciate it. And also, of course, there's no one person doing flips in the Love Show that probably holds the leverage. It's really the show as a whole.
Yeah, I mean, that's the whole point, is that you can, as talented as the acrobats are, there's always somebody there to replace them, and nobody's not going to go see the show because, this person, the 15th person out of 50 that works for it, doesn't feel like coming in tonight. So they're in a much better position than where, oh, hey, Celine has a sore throat or laryngitis, the whole show is canceled, we have to send everybody home, because obviously you're not going to go see the Celine show without Celine. So it's a much better position for the casinos.
We don't have Celine, but we have Eileen, and she's fantastic. Come on in. Now, speaking of Celine, so would you agree that that's probably the next iconic performer after Siegfried and Roy that really became a resident?
I think it is. I really think she is. And this was the Coliseum, and it's taking the idea of the entertainment and bringing back the residency and building this huge entertainment arena pretty much as a showplace for Celine and then other people. And it's combining the big star and that marketable persona with that production show and having that value that you can have for a couple years.
Got it. Okay. And obviously that blueprint has worked very well because you see it more and more now. Right, Gwen Stefani, I think, was the most recent to announce a residency, but there's a few, right, that are...
Oh, yeah. And it's pretty good for the casino because it really helps them rebrand themselves pretty easily. If they think, well, maybe we're skewing too old, they'll bring in a Gwen Stefani who's got a younger fan base. So I think it works for a lot of reasons. It's pretty good sense to do this kind of thing.
Yeah, because New Kids on the Block, when they made them a resident, I mean, it's so brilliant because the people that were huge New Kids on the Block fans in their childhood are now in their 40s and have disposable income and will come out to see New Kids on the Block.
Which is kind of what Elvis was when Elvis became a star in Vegas. When Elvis became the big headliner in Vegas, his fan base was mostly in their 30s and 40s by that point. So it made a lot of sense. And people probably felt the same way. And it's really hard to imagine that once Elvis was probably this upstart, oh, that's what the kids want. We want to stick with Sinatra and people like that. So it's kind of funny how it goes in cycles like that. And, when they did the Celine thing, and even when Siegfried and Roy were performing, I said, it's kind of funny because someday people are going to talk about classic Vegas performers and they'll talk about Siegfried and Roy and Celine, and now they do.
So we're, 15 years away from the Justin Bieber residency when his fans are all middle-aged and wealthy?
Oh, hey, and I'm still waiting for Kid Rock.
Oh,
maybe that Limp Bizkit reunion will happen.
You're right. And okay, so now residencies are clearly a part of Vegas, probably aren't going away, but there's a new kind of a mix of what you brought up of late 70s, early or late 70s through today, really, where it's sports mixed with a residency. And what, elaborate on that.
And that is the Golden Knights, the Vegas Golden Knights, who have just advanced in the playoffs. So, go home team there.
Yeah.
And, really this is the kind of thing that people said would never work in Vegas, but it's worked really well. And it's probably going to continue to work. So it just shows how flexible it is. And once you have an arena, one thing you can do is you can have a hockey team there. That's going to give you a great base with not just locals, but also people from out of town coming in to see NHL hockey. And then you also have an arena for all kinds of other acts that you couldn't have accommodated otherwise. So really, it's kind of helps everybody. And even if the people coming to the game aren't huge gamblers, it doesn't matter because they're spending a lot of money. First of all, tickets are pretty expensive. Second of all, they've got to eat, and that's not cheap either.
Yeah, it's genius. It's genius. I mean, obviously heavyweight fights and UFC have been a big draw for a long time, but they're so sporadic. Now you got a team that's there, and maybe Nashville one weekend, and then Toronto, and it's a natural draw for different markets. It's brilliant.
I think so, and I do want to say I really think UFC should be recognized as Vegas's real first major league home team, because UFC for so many years after the Fertittas bought it was such a huge presence in Vegas, and I think having the pay-per-views here just helped to cement in people's mind, like, hey, Vegas is where big things happen. That's the big fight place is Vegas, and I think they helped keep that alive. And now we have the NHL here. That's
a great point. And I know Cinco de Mayo weekend, that's normally a huge fight weekend, and I think the casinos, a lot of them are already blaming not having a fight for a lighter than normal Cinco de Mayo.
Yeah.
Well, is there anything else that we didn't touch on, entertainment related?
I think we've covered it all.
All right. Well, I'm looking forward to next week's interview with Dr. Dave. And if anybody out there wants to meet Dr. Dave in person, here's some amazing talks on, we haven't touched on it, but these are like talks on the actual entrepreneurs that really built Las Vegas. And I know you have a couple other interesting talks that we'll cover, and also a chance to meet a lot of cool URComped customers. And we threw in a slot tournament. So we got a lot of fun things on the July 30th cruise out of Miami. It's on the URComped.com website. Check it out. We would love to see you there. Dr. Dave, thank you again, and we'll talk next week.
Thank you.